All right, good evening to our viewing audience. My name is Fitzroy Sergent, and I am teaching this lesson on radio communications and light gun signals. All right. So some of the materials that we're going to be using in this lesson are the sectional charts that we have, some of the chart supplements. We're going to go through different chart supplements so you guys can get a view of what's depicted there in terms of frequencies and what's pertinent to communications and radio, to radio communications and light gun signals. Let's go through the objectives of this lesson. So some of the objectives of this lesson that I really want the student to emphasize on, to understand, and to grasp the concept and the procedures of them would be to find and use the correct radio frequencies, communicate effectively with ATC using proper FAA phraseology and procedures, understand the proper use of a transponder, know when and how to declare an emergency, troubleshoot issues with radios, and understand light and gun signals. I just want to walk through one by one each objective, and just to elaborate a little bit more, so you guys can get an understanding, a clear understanding of what we're really wanting you to grasp and know. So find and use correct radio frequencies. So a lot of times we would get there's like multiple different frequencies all over the place in terms of sectional charts, and when you're looking through a chart supplement, for example. And I'm just going to actually pull up one of the sectional charts so you guys can see what I'm referring to in terms of frequencies on a sectional chart. All right, so here I have pulled up here the Fayetteville Regional Airport and Grays Creek Uncontrolled Airport, 2 Golf Charlie Airport. And so I'm just going to focus on the frequencies that we have here for these 2 airports. One is a class Golf, which is Grays Creek, and class Charlie for Fayetteville. So we have a control tower frequency, which is 118.3, and that's what we would use to speak to the tower on the ground. Speak to the tower, while we're on the ground or in the air. We would contact, while we're on the ground, we contact the ground frequency, which is not actually here right now. But in the air, we would talk to tower, or we would talk to tower once we're getting ready to take off as well, or getting ready to land. We talk to tower. And that's 118.3. And our ATIS to pick up weather information is 121.25. And when the tower is closed, then we have 122.5 as our CTAF frequency, and CTAF stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, that pilots use to communicate with each other throughout this terminal area of that airport. Down here at Grays Creek, this is the airport I first got my private flight in, did my first lesson, and they only have a CTAF frequency, and that is 122.9. So we would put into our comms 122.9, and we would talk to other pilots in that area, in the terminal area of that airport, and other surrounding airports as well. Sometimes other airports might have the same frequency, and they'll be able to pick us up on that same frequency as well. So that's just an example of what the first objective that I discussed earlier. Okay, so went through the first objective. The second one, I'm going to go thoroughly through them, but I'm just going to give a brief overview of what I want you guys to really pick up on the key components of. So the second one is communicate effectively with ATC using proper phraseology, using proper FAA phraseology and procedures. And so we have certain ways that we pronounce our alphabets and certain ways that we pronounce numbers, such as niner, right? So instead of saying the number 9, we say niner. Instead of saying the word G, you'd say golf. Or you would say Charlie, or something like that along those lines, instead of using the actual word. And what that does is to help ATC understand what you actually said. Instead of getting M and N confused, you might use Mike and November. because they both sound similar. So just using proper phraseology, saying your numbers the right way. So it's just like a proper communication channel between you and air traffic control. So everybody's on the same page, on the same sheet of music. Understand the proper use of a transponder. We have a transponder in our aircraft to help us to put particular codes in the transponder so ATC can see us on our radar, see us on their radar, or have a sense of situational awareness of us. They're able to track our altitude. They're able to track the tail number on the aircraft, and other just access. Transponder helps us to give ATC access to what we got going on. So there's different types of transponders, and I'm going to go through detail through that as well while I get to that step. Know when and how to declare an emergency. So it's very, very imperative that we know exactly what constitutes as an emergency. And emergency can be declared for a myriad of things, but understanding the cues of when emergency is sufficient enough to be declared. Because sometimes you might have a simple fault in a system that you can fly without, or you can just easily turn it off, versus declaring an emergency. And so I'm gonna go through a list of things that you can declare an emergency for. And sometimes, if the stress level is too much, then it is incumbent on you to communicate with ATC and probably not declare an emergency, but to let them understand your situation and seek further guidance from there. So just understanding when and where to you should declare an emergency. Troubleshoot issues with the radios. A lot of times when students are in the early phases of training, they're very, very intimidated by the radio signals, by the radio communication, and they get scared of ATC. They don't want to sound like they're incompetent. They don't want to sound like they're unprofessional, so they would hesitate, or they would stall, or they would depend on the flight instructor to give them that form of information or to communicate with ATC, and they rather just do the flying. So, and sometimes radios go in and out. A lot of times we might make a call, we're not hearing back from them, we start to panic. So understanding stress management, understanding, that there's different ways to work around communication issues with ATC. And last but not least, understanding light gun signals. So here I drew a picture on the board of the light gun signals, and I also drew a table lower down. But I'm just going to show you guys right quick what I drew. And here I drew a plane with a tower giving them a steady red signal, and that means stop on the ground. That line to the tower means stop on the ground. And if this aircraft was in flight, then that steady red light from the tower would mean give way and continue circling. Up here, I have another, let me see if I can get this camera positioned properly. Up here, I have another aircraft, and it's showing a flashing green from the tower, flashing green. And flashing green means clear for taxi. Flashing green in the air, because the aircraft is in the air, it means return for landing. Flashing green from the tower means return for landing. So that aircraft is supposed to go out and reposition themselves to prepare for a landing. Also, flashing red from the tower means in the air, flashing red because they're pointing towards the sky. It means airport unsafe, do not land. So anytime you see a flashing red, airport unsafe, do not land. And I'm going to go through these more thoroughly when I get to that point in the lesson, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what to expect. All right, so for continuation of this lesson, I'm going to start discussing the topic of who are you calling, because it's very important to identify the proper frequency
and to contact the right people. So we have Unicom, which is more of an advisory communications or advisory comms, general communications. Say, for example, you want to contact the FBO for fuel, or you want to get a rental car, whatever the case may be, you'll contact the Unicom frequency, and it's usually a different frequency than the CTAF frequency. So that's our Unicom. So contact fuel or rental cars prior to your arrival. While you can contact them while you're up in the air, or you can contact them on the ground. The CTAF frequency we have here is CTAF stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, and that's the frequency we use at non-tower airports. So whenever the tower is closed, we get onto that frequency, and it's usually something of like let's say 122.8, or sometimes it's the same tower frequency, just different at different times. So it'd be like 1 to 1.9 or something like that. Whenever the tower is closed, you would still contact them on CTAF, but the tower would be closed. So it depends. If the tower is open, they might have a different frequency, and they might give a different frequency if it's closed during that time. And that's another advisory frequency, and we use that whenever we are on the ground, or getting ready to take off, or making laps in the pattern. For example, we would inform other pilots in the vicinity of the airport what we're doing. So if I'm taking up and I'm turning a left crosswind, I would say, for example, get on contact the CTAF, and I would say, for example, Lafayette traffic, November Purdue 856 Papa uniform is turning left crosswind for runway 27, and that's the call you make on a CTAF frequency, and so that way other pilots in the area who are they have situational awareness of what's going on. Then we have the ground frequency, which manages aircraft and vehicles on the ground. So whenever you land, or prior to you taking the active runway, you'll be speaking to ground frequency, and they direct you to give you taxi instructions and so forth. Hold short instructions, taxi instructions, and other types of instructions they want you to do on the ground. We also have tower, which helps to direct traffic in the vicinity of the airport and during takeoffs and landings. So usually the vicinity is considered 5 miles within the airport terminal environment. And so tower is who conducts the procedures for takeoffs and landings. Down here I have approach and departure. So that'd be like, for example, Grissom approach. Grissom is when we're getting traffic instructions in the vicinity of the airport for arrivals and departures. So anything beyond 5 miles, you would contact approach or departure, and there's the ones conducting operations within that area, within that airport vicinity area, terminal area, and they help you with holds, or they help you with IFR traffic and give you certain guidance throughout that area. The last one we have is center, and these are all different frequencies. So for example, tower is 121.9, ground is, tower is 119.6, 119.6 for Lafayette, and the ground is different frequencies, 1 to 1.9. And then Grissom approaches 123.85, and Chicago approaches something like 133.1. So they're all different frequencies, and it's very important to know who you're calling. Sender is for en route traffic, so you would switch over from Grissom. So the sequence goes like this. When we start the flight, we start off on the ground frequency. Then once you get ready to take the active runway, you transition to the tower frequency. After you take off and you're outside of the 5 miles of or 3 or 5 miles, it depends on how quickly they transition you over. But they would then take you into the arrival approach departure area, which is Grissom approach 123.85, and you're out there in the practice area, or you're out there further than 5 miles from the airport. Grissom will be talking to them, giving you a guidance and approach. And then center is when you're going past that threshold, usually you're more than 50 miles out of the airport environment, you're going to another area, you contact the Chicago Center, and they'll give you guidance for that, for your radio communications section. So. All right, so now I'm going to break down the sequence of how you go about making a call in the tower environment when you want to, when you get ready to take off or ready to go. So your initial call is you're going to be, who are you calling? So for example, Lafayette Ground, right? And then who you are, you're going to identify yourself, your tail number. So you'd be either Purdue 65, or if you're not in the Purdue fleet, then you would use whatever tail number you have. For example, November 853 Alpha Bravo. You're gonna let them know where you are in that portion of the airport. So you can be either on the ramp or in a specific location, or like outside hangar 5 or 6, or whatever area in the airport you are. So ground can identify you. And give you proper taxi instructions to get you to the runway of use. Then you're gonna let them know what is it that you want. So you're requesting taxi, right? So they'll give you a taxi clearance. So what you're doing is requesting a taxi clearance. And then any information, let them know that you have the current ATIS, or the current weather information, so that they know that you're up to date on the environment of the airport. So what the winds are, what the temperature is, what the current altimeter setting for the pressure altitude is during that within that hour, and the active runways of usage and whatnot. And any other advisory information comes from the ATIS. So you let them know that you have information, Charlie. Say it would sound something like this. Lafayette Ground, Purdue 65, it's outside hangar 5 with information, Charlie, ready to taxi, or requesting taxi clearance. And then they would call you back and give you whatever it is that you want. So they would say Purdue 65, taxi to runway 23 via Bravo or via Alpha. And so that way you're tracking, they give you instructions and you follow the guidance for them. At a non-type airport, it goes the same way, but the only thing is you don't have anyone to talk to. So you're not contacting ground, but you're just saying Frankfurt traffic, for example. If you're out in Frankfurt, which is an uncontrolled airport, you'd say Frankfurt traffic, Purdue 65 is taxiing to runway 9, for example. And so that way people in the area know what you're doing on the ground, and they have situational awareness of where you are and what you're doing. You let them know that you have any information, any additional traffic, or any additional information, and you would end the call with Frankfurt traffic. So you begin the call with traffic or whatever area you're at. For example, Frankfurt, you end the call with Frankfurt traffic. So it would sound like Frankfurt traffic, Purdue 65 is turning left crosswind for runway 9 Frankfurt. Yeah, and it'd be like that. All right, so I'm just going to go briefly through some other important frequencies that we use at the for our airport operations. And so one of them are the emergency or distress frequency, which is monitored by ATC, and that's 1 to 1.5. So anytime you're going through a situation or you need some help or you need to help get down, whatever, you let's say for example, you want to declare emergency, you kind of contact 1 to 1.5 and let them know your situation. The next one you're going to use is general weather advisory, and that's 1 to 2.2, and I use that from whenever I'm flying to a different, on a cross-country flight to a different state or a different city or country. Then I would contact them for weather advisory information along the route, so they help me with en route weather and so forth. They would let you know what the conditions are like 50 miles out of or 100 miles out from wherever you are. And they also give you updated NOTAMs of the airport that you're going to, and help you assist you with any form of flight planning that you may need, or any form of pertinent information that you need along your route of flight. They're very, very helpful. I use them multiple times, so don't shy away from contacting them. They're actually waiting there to help you. So use them, and they're a great resource. your ATIS, AVOS, or ASOS. So you see your area traffic advisory frequency or your weather observations surveillance frequency. 127.75 is the frequency that we use here at Purdue. That's to get your current weather information. You can only receive weather information. You can transmit on these type of frequencies. And then we have another frequency is our dispatch frequency, which is 123.3 here at Purdue. It can be anything wherever you are. And we use that for whenever we're requesting to parking to where to know to park their aircraft, or if we're coming late on arrival, or we have some sort of delay, and we know we're going to get past our slot time or for the duration of the booking period for the aircraft, then we would contact dispatch. I'm going to move into where we can find our frequencies on the chart, and then I'm going to pull up a chart and then show you guys where exactly in the chart supplement you need to go to get these frequencies out of unfamiliar airport that you probably don't know of. Okay, so this is the chart supplement of Purdue's airport. We have a whole bunch of stuff here, but in order I wanted to help the student identify where to find these communication frequencies that they need to use. And so we'll find them all the way down to the end. That's all these other paragraphs of information, and we come down to communications. And we have a CTAF frequency of 119.6, and that is the same radio, that's the same tower frequency when the tower is in operation, but the CTAF frequency is whenever the tower is closed. So the tower closes at a specific time, and it's from 1200 Zulu to 0200 Zulu. So whenever we're operating out of these hours of operation, we use the CTAF frequency, which is just the same frequency, 119.6. ATIS, the weather information, 127.75 is the ATIS frequency, and 122.95 is the Unicom frequency. For example, if you want to get a rental car or we want to contact the FBO at Purdue Aviation or something, for example. We have our RCO frequency, also a radio communications outlet frequency, and it's 122.2, and that's terahertz radio. Grierson approach is 123.85, like I mentioned earlier, and Chicago Center is also 123.85, and sometimes they switch you from different frequencies based off of the location that you are. So if you're coming from the north, they give you a different frequency. If you're coming from the south or the southeast, they give you a frequency. Just to clear too much conjunction on the frequency. So you want to have at least a controlled amount on each segment. And Tower 119.6 again, and clearance delivery. They give you a number to pick up your clearance, and that's if let's say the tower is closed or wherever you pick your clearance up from, ground is closed, whatever the case may be, then you contact them on that number to pick up your clearance. And so that's where you find your communications frequencies relevant for that airport environment that you are. Alright, so now I'm just going to briefly go through very special scenarios where you can receive information via VOR, right? So you can receive special information through the VOR, and this example right here is you can receive information through terahertz radio, which is 122.0, right? So you get any advisory information you might need through that frequency. But in order, if you want to communicate, then you have to transmit on 122.1, which is up here, above the box. All right. So here we have the Morse code, and we have the VOR identifier of Shelby, and the channel, and that's the code that you would receive the information on. If you want to transmit, you would transmit through terahertz radio on 122.1, and you would listen and receive on 112.0. And in order for you to hear the transmission, right? In order for you to hear them, you want to make sure you need to click on the nav frequency, right? So if you want to hear them, hear the transmission from 112.0, you need to make sure you activate the navigation radio and also have the listening. So that would be the second button on the comms to listen to receive in frequency, receive guidance on 122.1. So that's just a very special scenario. All right, so now I'm going to walk through process of when you need to respond. And so a lot of times we respond whenever we are having clearances and your instructions, and we have to read back so they can confirm the information that they've given to us, we have the correct information. So for takeoff and landing clearances, they would give us a runway assignment, and they would say our call sign, and we would need to read back our runway assignment given to us and the call sign. An example of that would be Purdue 65, clear for takeoff on runway 9, and so you would say clear for takeoff runway 9, Purdue 65. So runway and then call sign. The same thing as taxi instructions. They would give us a destination, a route, and a call sign. So an example of that would be Purdue 65. You're cleared for runway 23 via Alpha, via taxi Alpha, and so we would say Purdue 65 is cleared for runway 23, which is a destination that we're going to. We're going to runway 23. The route is the taxi route through taxiway Alpha, and with our call sign Purdue 65. Any whole short clearances or cross-runway clearances. So they would say, for example, Purdue 65, you're cleared to runway 5 via Bravo, whole short of runway 10. And so that's an example of when we have intersecting runways and we have a whole short sign. That means that they have traffic coming in from one direction on runway 10, and we need to give that traffic space to continue their landing or to continue their takeoff, and so we would stop. So that's just an example of a whole short clearance. Line up and wait is another one that we need to verify. They need to verify that we understood the instruction of line up and wait, which means you would take the active runway, you would leave the taxiway, get onto the runway, and you just stay on the runway and line up and wait, right? Extending downwind or upwind, so if they have other people in the pattern, then you would want to, they would want to say that back, that you're extending downwind or upwind, so that way they know that you received the proper clearance and that you're doing exactly what they told you to do, so that way they can create separation for other aircraft in the vicinity of the airport in the traffic pattern. Some of the warnings, is traffic warnings, look out for looking for traffic. You would, so they say Purdue 65, you have traffic 11 o'clock, 3 miles 11 o'clock. Then you would say you respond looking for traffic or traffic inside. Whenever you do find the traffic, you respond to traffic inside, letting them know that you have situational awareness of whatever they told you to look out for. Might be a helicopter, an air balloon, whatever it is that's in the air. Advise you don't need to respond. So for example, be advised of birds, you don't need to respond for that. If they give you updated wind information, so let's say for example, the ATIS gave you that winds were 180 at 18 knots, and then the wind changed, and now the winds are 220 at 6 knots, and they will just give you updated wind information, so that way you know what the winds are. And so what they say be advised. Once you hit be advised, you don't really need to respond. North departure approved, you also don't need to respond to that. That's an advisory frequency. I respond to it sometimes, and I say no departure approved, or contact Grissom, or whatever the case may be, and so forth. Now on the topic of talking on the radio, whenever you're talking, so you need to talk whenever you're about to switch your frequency. So they tell you contact Grissom from tower. Tower's telling you to contact Grissom, which is the approach or departure frequency. You will let them know that you're contacting Grissom. Whenever you have a request, whenever you need to verify anything, or if you, let's say, for example, you heard your call sign, then you need to come on the radio and acknowledge that they called you. All right, so for special types of airspace, we have special types of communications that we use, communication operations that we use, and it just depends, right? So for these controlled airspaces like Class D radio operations, you need to give initial call on the ground and initial call on the tower frequency before you're ready to taxi and take off. So initial call on the ground before you're ready to taxi, initial call to tower on the tower frequency before you're ready to take off in Class D, Class Delta airspace. You're also going to call tower whenever you're returning within 10 miles of the airport, and call ground whenever you're vacating a runway before you're taxiing. So how that happens, for example, is I'll be here at Purdue is a class Delta during the active times of the class Delta, and so I would contact ground, let's say Lafayette ground, Purdue 5, is outside Hangar 5 with information Alpha ready to taxi. So I have to let ground know what I'm doing. I can't just like leave my spot and just start moving into an active zone, active movement zone, right? And you can move about the ramp without calling ground, but once you get into the area where ground is operating, they control the area where ground is operating, and they have a yellow line or some lines there identifying those zones. Then you need to contact ground. And same thing as tower. Before you're ready to take off, you have to contact the tower to let them know. And ground usually informs you to contact tower, right? So ground will let you know whenever it's okay to switch over to tower. Or sometimes ground won't tell you to switch over to tower, but whenever you get to your destination, which is the prior to the whole short line of the runway that you're going to take off on, then you would contact tower so they can give you guidance on when to take off and so whatnot. And also, like I said, the contact tower when you're 10 miles out from the airport. So the class Delta has a 10-mile radius around it, and well, the class Delta has a 4-mile radius, but tower prefers for you to contact them once you're within 10 miles of the airport. And they need to hear your call sign, and they need to receive your call sign, and you need to hear them say your call sign back to know you have two-way radio communication before you enter that airspace. And then call ground after vacating the runway. So once you get off of the active runway, so let's say you land on runway 23, you exit off of taxiway Bravo or Bravo 3 or whatever it might be, then you would contact ground so you can get taxi instructions to direct you back to where you first originally started, which for Air Purdue, we start off on the ramp. In class Charlie and Bravo, you have to also make the initial call within 10 miles out of the airport, and you need to hand off, or whenever you hand off to flight following, so you would contact them. In class Bravo, it's a special case where you have to request clearance into the airspace before you ever enter in there, and so once you have to hear the words, you are cleared into the class Bravo airspace, or you got cleared into the airspace. And so that's just some special caveats of the operations in controlled airspace areas. All right, so now I'm going to discuss when we should declare emergency, right? To identify the times when we need to declare emergency, and you can declare emergency anytime you're under a form of distress, right? For example, you have a fire in the aircraft, you have a mechanical failure, or structural damage, or you lost your instruments, or something along those lines. You would declare an emergency. If you have an urgent situation, and then so the call would be like Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. You'd say your call sign, Purdue 65, Purdue 65, or November 843 proper uniform. Or Alpha Bravo, whatever it might be. I'm declaring an emergency. I have a fire, or you would let them know what the situation is, and to give them an idea of how to provide guidance and a form of direction to assist you as best way possible. For an urgent situation, you would say pan. You would let them know that, for example, that you have low fuel, for example, or you say your fuel tank got a hole, or it started leaking fuel, or your oil pressure is messing up, so you're going to end up eventually having to declare an emergency. Let them know so they can give you a sense of priority throughout the airspace, or direct you to the closest airport, so that way you can get down on the ground safely as soon as possible. So if you're in doubt as well, it's better to declare an emergency and fill the paperwork. It's better to be safe, knowing that forget about the embarrassment component of it and focus on actually getting the results that you need to make sure that you and your crew, or you and your passengers, and your aircraft is safe. So whenever you're in doubt and you need to get guidance, it's better to declare emergency so you get the priority. Whenever you're declaring emergency, you should provide as much information as possible. So you're the name of the station that you're calling, the emergency call, the aircraft identification and type sign. So if you're flying a Piper, for example, you need to let them know, hey, I'm flying a Piper Archer, so they can understand how to facilitate you. The nature of the emergency, and then they give you like what the weather conditions might be and whatnot. You don't always have to do all of this, but it's just good to give them as much information as possible. So a lot of times when you're declaring emergency for fuel, for example, they ask you how many souls do you have on board and what's your fuel, the amount of fuel that you have, so they can know if they need to send you to a closer airport versus letting you continue on. So they need to understand the nature of the emergency and nature of what you're going through in order to guide you and to give you better guidance. All right, so I'm going to discuss some of the communications failures that we as pilots need to be aware of, and just how to know how to troubleshoot them before we go ahead and squawk 7600, which is the frequency that we use whenever we've officially lost our comms. But prior to that, we need to try our best to restore our communications. And some of the things that we have here are to try a frequency on both COM 1 and COM 2. We have two different communication radios that we use. So if one's not working, just try the other one and see if you can get receive transmission through either one of them. The other one would be trying unplugging it and plugging it into the passenger side. So maybe your outlet might have gone bad, or is just not really keeping the connection of the headphone in there, or the mic might have gone bad or something. Just try the passenger side one or whichever other one you have in the plane, instead of saying that you don't have comms and you're declaring that you don't have comms and whatnot. Try everything you can. Return to the previous frequency. So let's say, for example, you were last on the frequency of Grissom of 123.85, and that was an approach or departure frequency, and you want to transition to Chicago Center, for example, and you might be too far away from Chicago Center to pick them up, or you might be too far away from, let's say, that's a bad example, you might be too far away from Lafayette Airport versus you on Grissom approach, and you're not within the radio range of trying to pick up the tower at Lafayette. So you are 123.85 of Grissom, which is the approach in the approach environment. You're approaching the airport, but you're still far away, and you can't pick up 119.6, which is the tower frequency for them. So you can just try another frequency, or go to the previous frequency and stay on Grissom. That way you can let them know that you're staying on this frequency because you're not picking up the tower, and then they give you better guidance from there. Try to transmit on 122.2, which is the general guard frequency. Transmit 1 to 1.5 actually, to see if you can, or you can also check your volume and your squelch to make sure that your volume is all the way up, and then the squelch, you're not having any form of static within the connection for them. And the radio failure procedures that we have here is just basically to fly to the nearest airport. If you're in a non-tower environment, it's your job to maintain visual separation and see and avoid other aircraft. And you would just enter the traffic pattern 500 feet above the pilot altitude. So for example, if the field elevation is 700 feet, then more than likely the traffic pattern would be 1,000 feet above the field elevation, so it'd be 1,700 feet. So you would want to approach at let's say 2,200 feet. Yeah, 2,200 feet AGL, and then enter on the left downwind and you circle around to land for a non-tower airport. Or if you're at a tower one, then you would approach 500 feet above, continue circling until the tower sees you and gives you a form of light gun signals. So if you did squawk 7,600, you'd want to come higher than pilot altitude, 500 feet above, and circle around, so that way tower can have a visual sight picture of where you are, and they can give you light gun signals to tell you if it's to come in to land, or if it's to circle to land and whatnot. A lot of errors that we have, radio communication errors, is repeating something that you think you heard versus verifying. So in aviation, I always say, don't assume, verify. You have to. That is very, very imperative and critical. If you don't understand the clearance that they gave you, or the sense of direction of vector or altitude, whatever it might be, don't guess and just do that. verify. We have a play button that you can always hit play, but if someone comes on the frequency after they given you an instruction, when you hit the play button, all you're gonna hear is the last person that was on the transmission. So although play is a good tool to have, it has to be done very quickly. But also just call back and verify, hey, Grayson Approach, Olafia Tower, can you repeat the instruction? And they will repeat it, right? So don't have any form of confirmation bias. If you don't think you heard something, confirm. And just using the incorrect frequency, for example, I was on the stage check and I was listening to the ground frequency as well as listening to the tower frequency. And so that's not really a good scenario because tower could have given me a particular instruction that is important for separation or to keep me safe or to give me a vector, and I might misconstrue or have mistakenly heard a ground communication call from another aircraft that ground was talking to, and I can think that the instructions he was giving me, that he was giving them, were for me, and I can end up doing the wrong thing. So let's make sure that you're on the correct frequency as well. All right, some other mistakes that pilots make, and I want the student to understand and be aware of, are not using your call sign or tail number. A lot of times, the ATC has many different aircraft contacting them all throughout the entire operation, right? And so they need to identify who is speaking to them so they can see you on radar, or they can give you the correct information, the correct guidance. And so it's always just used to use your call sign. Who are you? Who you are? So you would say Grayson Approach Purdue 65 is climbing from 1,500 to 3,000, and so you Purdue 65 and end the call with Purdue 65. So that way they know you start the call with your call sign, you end the call with your call sign, so that they're aware of who is calling them. And a lot of times you might be speaking on the radio and somebody cut you off, and it would cut off the transmission. And so they now don't know, they now don't have an idea of who was the last person speaking to them. So it's always good if you, that happens, that you reinstate your call sign so they know exactly who is speaking to them. And just be calm, take your time, don't rush the call. Always think of what you're gonna say prior to you saying it. I usually give myself a 2 count. I would practice. So for example, if I'm on the ground, I would think about everything I need to say. Lafayette ground, who I'm calling, Purdue 65, who I am, is outside of hangar, my position, right? Outside of hangar 5 or outside of hangar 6, with the current information. I think of everything I need to have prior to giving that call, so that way I don't spend too much time on the frequency, on the frequency, but also I'm professional and I meet all the criteria of what I need to give them so that they can give me back the proper information I need. Another one is not staying in your position or on the runway, so that can cause confusion, especially not staying in your position or your position on the runway. That can cause a lot of confusion, especially in untowered airports where you have multiple airports might be using the same frequency. So Frankfurt, for example, might be using a CTAF frequency of 122.9, for example, and Delphi might be using another frequency, that same frequency for their airport. So that's why we say Frankfurt traffic. So you identify what airport you are at, and you're making a left crossing, you're making a right base. Let them know what position on the airport that you are. So that way they can have an idea of situational awareness, what's going on around them. Another one is, I would say, like multiple airports use the same frequencies. So that was the example I just gave. And also another one is just failure to understand, acknowledge, or properly comply with ATC clearances. So let's say, for example, you're flying out and they give you a holding instruction. They say hold northwest of so whatever VOR, CTG VOR, climb maintain 3,500, left turns, and they give you a radial. They give you a very long clearance, and then you don't get all the parts of the clearance. For example, you would want to, although you want to write them down, but if you don't understand, don't just think you received the entire clearance and you think you got it. contact them back and ask them to repeat the clearance. And this time they know for a fact, okay, to slow down and to give it to you slowly so that way you can get the information. When I was a student pilot, I would always identify that I was a student pilot, so that way they know to use the correct, just slow down when they're giving their transmission calls to me, that way I can get all of the pieces of information and I'm guided the proper way. So the analysis that we use here is just, they want to make sure ATC acknowledges you and knows that you understood the information to prevent any form of confusion or risk. And so some of the things are, did the student hear the call sign being used? Did the student understand they needed to respond? So a lot of times they don't know when they need to respond. So only time you don't need to respond is when they give you advisory information. Anything other than that, you need to respond what they tell you. If they give you a clearance, you need to read it back. And if they're giving you a vector or a sense of altitude change or whatever, you need to verify that you received that clearance and you're making the change. So did the student understand what ATC said and how to respond? So there's no how you need to go about doing that. So like I said, advisors, you don't respond or anything else, you need to let them know what's going on, that you've received the information and you're actually making the change. All right, so just to conclude this lesson, we went through radio communications and the process of how we communicate with ATC, how to identify different types of frequencies on the charts, and how we speak to different communication frequencies. So ground, tower, departure, who we are calling. We discussed the request, receive, confirm format of how we go about communicating with ATC. The initial call format, when we say who we are, or who we're calling, who we are, what we want, what needs to be read back and what needs to be acknowledged. In terms of advisories, you don't need to respond, but if you're given instruction or a clearance, then you need to read that back. Clearances need to be read back verbatim, and instructions you need to apply and comply. Don't hesitate to declare an emergency if you're going through a situation where you're uncertain, or you have, let's say you have a fire, your engine is failing, or you have high oil pressure, you know for a fact that your engine might quit very soon, and you're trying to rectify the problem and you're not getting any assistance, to prevent you from strictly focusing on that one issue, or if you're just not able to troubleshoot, then you need to go ahead and declare an emergency to put yourself in the best situation to be safe. And always ask ATC for clarification or repeat anything you don't understand. So like I said, they give you a clearance, they give you a special instruction, and you don't really understand it or you didn't get the full thing, but you don't want to think that you have it. Never assume, but always verify. And just repeat anything you don't understand. Ask them to let them read back slowly, let them ensure that you have the entire clearance that they gave you, the entire instruction that they gave you, so that way you can apply accordingly. And we also discussed light gun signals, which I did throughout the previous part of the lesson, when we have red and green and alternating green and white, or alternating green and red light gun signals. And so just having to understand those types of light gun signals and when to be able to differentiate when they're on the ground or when they're in the air and what each of these light gun signals mean. So take time to review the lesson, and I hope the student really benefits from this.